Have you ever felt like you don't belong anymore in places where everyone else seems so comfortable? Have you noticed that the conversations around you seem empty? That the values everyone follows don't make sense to you anymore? Maybe you've started questioning things that nobody questions. And then came the silence. Not a silence of fear, but of someone who realized something too profound to share with those still living on autopilot. Today we're going to dive into the journey of those who have separated from the herd, using the ideas of Jung and Friedrich Nietzsche to understand why this silence is actually a sign of awakening. And in the first pinned comment, there's a special bonus for you. There's a moment in certain people's lives where something internal awakens. It's as if a voice whispered that the life you're living isn't really yours. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, not who the world expected you to be. Nietzsche, on the other hand, talked about freeing yourself from herd morality, that set of rules and values that everyone follows without thinking. Both understood the same truth. Most people live on autopilot, following the group, doing what everyone does, thinking what everyone thinks. But some people hear that internal calling and start questioning everything. Why do I do this? Why do I believe this? These questions are the beginning of a journey that will separate you from the herd. And when this happens, you realize you can no longer pretend you're comfortable where everyone else is. This awakening is silent at first, almost imperceptible. You're in the middle of a party, surrounded by people, but you feel completely alone. You participate in conversations, but realize you're just repeating ready-made phrases, opinions that aren't yours. It's like waking up inside a dream and realizing that everything around you is artificial. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. There's no going back. But realizing you're different is just the beginning. The next step is even harder, having the courage to actually break away from everything that kept you safe. The herd offers something very seductive, which is the feeling of belonging, of being safe because everyone is doing the same thing. If everyone thinks alike, if everyone acts alike, you don't need to worry about being wrong. The problem is that this safety comes at a very high price. You need to abandon who you really are. Nietzsche understood this deeply. He saw the herd mentality as a comfortable prison where people traded freedom for social approval. Jung also knew that individuation requires leaving behind the expectations of others, even when it means disappointing people you love. This moment of rupture is scary because you're leaving the known and entering the unknown. You're choosing your own path when everyone around you is telling you you're wrong, that you should come back, that you're losing yourself. But the truth is the opposite. You're finding yourself. The courage needed here isn't the courage of movie heroes. It's the silent courage of waking up every day and choosing to be true to yourself, even when it would be much easier to return to the herd. It's the courage to disappoint expectations, to be misunderstood, to be alone. This is the rarest courage that exists, and it's exactly at this point that silence starts to make sense. When you're going through this profound transformation, you quickly realize you can't talk about it with just anyone. Try explaining your journey of self-discovery to someone who still thinks like the herd, and you'll see confusion, judgment, or even anger in their eyes. Why? Because your transformation works like a mirror that shows them their own prison. When you question the values they follow blindly, you force them to look at their own lives and consider that maybe they're living automatically, and that's too uncomfortable. So silence isn't about hiding what you're experiencing. It's about protecting your energy during a delicate moment. It's about understanding that not everyone is ready to hear, and that it's not your responsibility to convince anyone. You guard your discoveries like a treasure that can only be shared with those who are ready to see. Jung said that certain psychological truths can only be understood through direct experience. You can explain the taste of a fruit, but those who have never tasted it won't really know. Silence is also wisdom. It's knowing that words are limited, that certain experiences are untransmittable, that each person's journey is unique and personal. This silence brings something that seems scary at first, but is absolutely necessary: solitude. When you separate from the herd, you're alone. There's no way around it. The people who were around you when you thought like them start to distance themselves. Some will leave silently, others will criticize you openly. You realize that many of your friendships were based on agreement, not on real connection. They were friendships of convenience, of proximity, of thinking alike. And when you stop thinking alike, these connections fall apart. Jung and Nietzsche knew that this solitude is an essential part of the process. You need to be alone with yourself to really know yourself. In the constant noise of the herd, with all the voices telling you who you should be, it's impossible to hear your own voice. Solitude creates the silent space where you can finally hear yourself. It's in this silence that you find answers no one can give you, that you discover desires that are genuinely yours, that you recognize fears you've always carried but never examined. Solitude is the laboratory of individuation. It's where you experiment with being yourself without an audience, without judgment, without masks. And discovering that you can be good company for yourself is one of the greatest victories of this journey, because it means you no longer need the herd to feel complete. But the herd doesn't easily accept when someone separates. In fact, it reacts with hostility. Nietzsche warned about this. The herd fears and attacks what is different. Why? Because difference is a threat to the group's stability. If one member of the herd starts questioning, thinking differently, living another way, this can inspire others to do the same. And if many start leaving, the herd loses its power. So the group reacts by trying to bring you back. First with gentle advice. You're going through a phase, you'll regret it, you're losing yourself. If that doesn't work, comes the guilt. You're being selfish, you're abandoning your family, you think you're better than everyone. If guilt doesn't work, comes direct judgment. You're wrong, you're crazy, you're going to fail. And if none of that works, comes exclusion and defamation. The herd will talk badly about you, create stories about you, try to destroy your reputation. All of this because you dared to be different. Jung understood these dynamics as projections of the collective shadow. The group projects onto you everything they fear in themselves. The possibility of being different, of questioning, of being alone. You become the scapegoat for the herd's anxieties. And the more you stay firm on your path, the more intense the reaction becomes. But here's the secret. The intensity of the herd's reaction is proportional to the fear you awaken in them. The more they attack, the more you know you're touching on something true, something that threatens the comfortable lies they live. During this difficult process, one of the first things you need to do is remove the masks. Jung called these masks the persona, the social roles we use to be accepted. Everyone has various personas: the professional persona, the family persona, the social persona. These masks aren't necessarily bad. They're adaptations we make to navigate the world. The problem is when you only live through the masks and forget who's behind them. When you're part of the herd, your personas are built to please the group. You act as the group expects, speak as the group approves, think as the group thinks. Your true essence stays hidden, suffocated, because it's not compatible with collective expectations. But when you separate from the herd, these masks start to fall. At first, this is terrifying. Without the masks, you feel naked, exposed, vulnerable. Who am I without these roles I've always played? But as the masks fall, something wonderful happens. You start to know your true face. You discover tastes that are genuinely yours, not borrowed from the group. You find values that really mean something to you, not just values that repeat what everyone says. You recognize talents you had hidden because the herd didn't value them. And for the first time in your life, you start living from the inside out, expressing who you are, instead of living from the outside in, molding yourself to external expectations. And it's in this process of removing the masks that the true encounter happens. Jung called it the encounter with the self, with a capital S, because it's not the small ego self, but your deepest center, your true essence. This is the moment where everything starts to make sense. All the questions that led you to separate from the herd begin to have answers. You now understand why that old life seemed so empty, because it wasn't your life. It was the life the herd expected from you. You understand why those values didn't make sense. Because they weren't your values. They were just repetitions of what everyone believed. In this encounter with your individual nature, you discover your unique purpose, that which only you can do in the world. You recognize your true talents, not those the herd valued, but those that spring from your essence. Nietzsche talked about creating your own values instead of accepting the herd's values. That's what happens here. You stop living by the standards of success, happiness, and fulfillment that everyone follows, and start defining what those words mean to you. This is the hidden treasure that justifies the entire painful journey. It's the moment where you realize it was worth separating, because now you're truly living. Not a borrowed life, not an imitation life, but your genuine and unique life. And that feeling is priceless. But even after this transformative encounter, the misunderstanding continues. And often it comes from the most painful places. Your own family. The people who raised you, who grew up with you, who should know you best, are often the ones who least understand your transformation. Why? Because they still think like the herd. They see you through old lenses, through the expectations they've always had about you. When you change profoundly, it challenges the image they built of you in their heads. And often, they can't accept this new version. They want back the person you were, the one who fit perfectly in the place they had reserved for you. Your individuation also exposes their lack of individuation. When you live authentically, it shows them how they're still trapped in false roles, following others' expectations. This is too uncomfortable a mirror. So they react by trying to make you go back to who you were. They use love as manipulation. If you loved me, you wouldn't change like this. They use tradition as an argument. It's always been this way in our family. They use fear as a tool. You're going to regret it. You're throwing everything away. Dealing with this family misunderstanding is one of the most painful aspects of the journey, because you love these people, but you can no longer be who they want you to be. And you learn a difficult lesson. True love doesn't require you to betray yourself to please the other. True love accepts transformation, celebrates growth, respects individuality. Anything less than that is control disguised as affection. But there's something that sustains you through all these difficulties. Throughout history, there are patterns that repeat. Jung called them archetypes, universal images that appear in all cultures. One of these archetypes is that of the solitary hero, the one who needs to separate from the tribe to find truth. Think of Buddha, who left his palace and his family to seek enlightenment. Think of Jesus, who withdrew to the desert for 40 days. Think of all the mythological heroes who had to make a solitary journey before returning transformed. These patterns aren't coincidence. They reflect a deep psychological truth. Real transformation requires separation. You can't transform while you're immersed in the expectations and demands of the collective. When you recognize that your journey is part of this universal archetypal pattern, you feel less alone. You understand that what you're living isn't madness or childish rebellion, but a legitimate process of psychological maturation that millions of people have lived before you. Nietzsche, even without using the language of archetypes, described the same pattern when speaking of the free spirit, the one who breaks the chains of herd mentality. Recognizing these patterns validates your experience and gives you strength to continue. You're not inventing a new path. You're following an ancient path that has always existed, the path of those who dare to seek truth instead of comfort, authenticity instead of approval. But before you can be born again, something needs to die. And this death is one of the hardest parts of the journey. It's not a physical death, but a symbolic one. It's the death of that version of you that belonged to the herd. That person who did what everyone did, who thought what everyone thought, who sought approval and safety in the group. This version of you needs to die so a new version can be born. Jung understood this process as essential for individuation. It's not possible to simply add authenticity on top of a false life. You need to completely dismantle the old structure. And it hurts. Even knowing that the old version of you was limited and false, you feel the loss. You feel nostalgic for the simplicity of those times, when you didn't question anything, when following the group was enough. You feel guilt for leaving behind expectations that people placed on you. You feel fear of the unknown, because if you're no longer who you were, who are you now? This process of symbolic death comes with all the stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, until finally acceptance. You need to allow this old version to die completely, without trying to rescue it or keep it alive. Only then can the new emerge. And when it emerges, you realize the death was necessary. There was no room for the new while the old occupied all the space. Symbolic death clears the ground so something genuine can grow. As you advance on this journey, something interesting starts to happen in your way of thinking. The herd lives in a black and white world, right and wrong, good and bad. Everything is simple. Everything is divided into clear categories. This gives the herd a sense of certainty, of knowing exactly how things are. But this simplicity is false. Reality is complex, full of nuances, of grays, of paradoxes. Jung talked about the importance of integrating opposites. You're not just light or just shadow, you're both. You're not just rational or just emotional, you're both. Life isn't about choosing one side and rejecting the other, but about integrating seemingly contradictory aspects into a greater wholeness. When you move away from the herd's binary thinking, you start to embrace this complexity. You learn to live with ambiguity, with uncertainty, with questions that don't have easy answers. Nietzsche also talked about transcending the herd's simplistic moral categories. He understood that good and evil are often social constructions used to control behavior, not absolute truths. This ability to integrate opposites and live with complexity is a sign of psychological maturity. It's something the herd can't do because the herd needs absolute certainties to feel safe. But you no longer need these false certainties. You're comfortable with mystery, with complexity, with the journey without a defined map. You understand that life is paradoxical and contradictory, and this doesn't scare you anymore. In fact, you learn to dance with paradoxes instead of trying to resolve them. And from this integration is born something powerful, a deep inner strength. When you stop seeking approval from the herd, when you stop needing external validation, an internal conviction starts to form. It's not arrogance or stubbornness, it's something much deeper. It's the calm certainty of someone who knows their own truth and doesn't need to convince anyone about it. This strength is silent. It doesn't need to announce itself, doesn't need to defend itself, doesn't need to prove anything. People who still think like the herd often mistake this silent strength for weakness. They think that if you really believed in your path, you'd be shouting about it, defending it, trying to convert others. But it's exactly the opposite. True strength doesn't need volume. Nietzsche saw this strength as a characteristic of the free spirit, the one who isn't moved by others' opinions. Jung saw it as a result of individuation, when you become your own center of gravity. This strength sustains you when the herd tries to pull you back. When they use guilt, you remain firm. When they use fear, you remain firm. When they use emotional manipulation, you remain firm. Not because you're cold or indifferent, but because you're anchored in something deeper than social approval. You're anchored in your own truth, in your own purpose, in your own essence. And this anchor is unshakable because it doesn't depend on anything external. It's completely yours. And then something surprising starts to happen. When you really separate from the herd and its superficial relationships, you open space for something better. Genuine connections. Not many, because people who have truly individuated are rare. But when you find other free spirits, others who have also gone through the journey of separating from the herd, something magical happens. You recognize each other instantly. No need for long explanations, no need for proof. There's a resonance, a silent understanding that comes from having gone through similar journeys. These new friendships are completely different from the old ones. They're not based on agreement or doing the same things. They're based on authenticity, on being able to be genuinely you without masks. They're based on mutual respect for each other's journey. Jung talked about the importance of finding your true tribe, not the tribe of blood or proximity, but the tribe of soul. These are the people who really see you, not the version of you the herd expected. They celebrate your individuality instead of trying to mold it. They challenge you to grow instead of keeping you small. You might have only one or two friends like this, while before you had dozens of superficial acquaintances. But these few true connections are worth more than hundreds of false relationships. Because when you talk with them, you don't need to translate your experience into language the herd understands. You can speak freely, knowing you'll be understood at a deep level. But it's important to be honest about the cost of all this. Because leaving the herd isn't just liberation and discovery. There's a real price you pay. You lose social approval, that good feeling of being accepted and validated by the group. You lose the comfort of conformity, of knowing exactly what to do because everyone is doing the same thing. You lose the safety of collective thinking, where you never need to question yourself because the answers are already ready. You lose relationships, some you thought were important, and it hurts even when you know they were based on falseness. You lose the innocence of not questioning, that simpler time when you just lived without analyzing everything. There are moments where you'll miss that simplicity, where you'll wonder if it was worth it. Jung was honest about this. He never promised that individuation would be easy or comfortable. Nietzsche didn't romanticize the life of the free spirit either. Both knew that this path requires sacrifice, but what you gain in return makes it all worthwhile. You gain inner freedom, the ability to make real choices instead of just reacting to expectations. You gain authenticity, the joy of living as you really are. You gain your own purpose, something that comes from within, not something imposed from outside. And you gain peace with yourself, perhaps the greatest prize of all. The peace of no longer being an internal war between who you are and who you pretend to be. The peace of looking in the mirror and recognizing the person looking back at you. The peace of lying down at night, knowing you lived your day authentically, not playing a role to please others. As this peace settles in, something fundamental changes in how you deal with judgment. The herd will always judge. That's the herd's job, keeping everyone in line through approval and disapproval. When you were part of the herd, these judgments controlled you. You avoided certain behaviors, not because you thought they were wrong, but because you were afraid of what they'd think. You pursued certain achievements not because they were important to you, but because the herd would validate them. Your entire life was governed by external opinions. But individuation frees you from this. Not overnight, but gradually. You start to realize that others' judgment says much more about them than about you. When someone criticizes you for living differently, what they're really saying is, "I'm afraid to live differently." When someone attacks you for questioning the group's values, what they're saying is, "I'm afraid to question, because then I'd have to face that I wasted years following things I don't believe in." You develop an internal center so strong that external storms no longer shake you. Nietzsche called this amor fati, love of fate, the ability to embrace your life completely without needing external validation. Jung saw it as a natural result of individuation, when the self becomes more important than the persona. You reach a point where you genuinely don't care if the herd approves or disapproves, because you have something more valuable, your own approval. And when you approve of yourself, when you're at peace with your choices, the whole world can disagree, and it won't move you 1 millimeter from your path. But this journey isn't about running away from the world. There's a moment where you return. Jung talked about this in terms of the hero's myth. The hero doesn't make the journey just for himself. He goes, transforms, and returns to offer his gifts to the world. But this return is different. You're not going back to the herd. You're not submitting again to the collective mentality. You're returning as a complete individual who can now contribute in a unique way. The difference is that before you were just another indistinguishable member of the group. Now you're someone with a unique perspective, developed talents, wisdom acquired through the journey. You can offer the world things only you can offer because only you went through your specific journey. Nietzsche talked about the overman not as someone who separates from humanity, but as someone who elevates it through their example. You don't need to preach or teach. Just living authentically is already a form of contribution because it shows others that it's possible. Some people will look at you and see inspiration. They'll think, if he managed to free himself, maybe I can too. You become living proof that there's another way to live beyond herd conformity, and that alone is already an enormous gift. Your return isn't triumphant or loud. It's silent but profound. You simply live your truth, and that naturally influences and inspires whoever is ready to be influenced and inspired. And finally, the silence that began as protection during transformation becomes a permanent quality. Not because you have something to hide, but because you've reached a wisdom that understands when to speak and when to be silent. You realize that most things don't need to be said. You no longer need to explain yourself, justify yourself, defend yourself. You don't need to convince the herd that your path is valid because the herd's validation no longer means anything to you. This silence is dignity. It's the deep understanding that your life speaks for itself. Your actions say more than your words. Your results are more eloquent than your arguments. Jung understood that the most individuated individuals often seem the most silent because they have no need to prove anything. Nietzsche also valued the silence of the free spirit, the one who doesn't waste energy trying to illuminate those who choose to live in darkness. You speak when your voice can genuinely help someone who's ready to listen. You share when you meet another free spirit who can benefit from your experience. But you no longer waste time trying to explain your journey to the herd because you know they can't understand. Not because of intellectual limitation, but because they haven't gone through the experience. It's like trying to describe a color to someone who has never seen. Words are insufficient. So you live your truth in powerful silence, knowing that those who need to find you will find you, and those who don't need to can continue on their path. And that's perfectly fine. There's no judgment, no superiority, just acceptance that each person is at their own stage of the journey. This journey of separating from the herd was never about superiority. It's not about being better than others or looking with contempt at those still living in conformity. It's about honesty with yourself. It's about the courage to live the only life that is genuinely yours. And if you've made it this far in this video, there's a good chance you're on this journey too, at some stage of it. Maybe you're at the beginning, just starting to question. Maybe you're in the middle, feeling the loneliness of having separated, but not yet having found your true tribe. Or maybe you've already gone through all this and are on the other side, living in dignified silence. Wherever you are on this journey, know that you're not alone. Millions before you have walked this path, and millions after you will still walk it. It's humanity's oldest journey, the call to become who you really are. And something that can help you in this process is the exclusive material I developed for you. It's in the first pinned comment. If this content resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. Leave your like if you've had the courage to follow your own path, and comment which part of this journey touched you the most. Until the next video.